Hi there! It's Jersey Dude back again. It took me a while to get around to making this final video, and that's because I had to order some thread. I wanted to try to get the proper values to make this guy look the way he's supposed to look. What do you think? Look at this sew out. Did this thing work, or did this thing work? That is arguably one of the best stitch outs I have ever gotten. Right off the bat, right off the dime, first time out of the gate, look at that stitch out. This is a photograph of the actual patch. I pressed it out hard with the iron. I have a technique that I use where I actually soak the patch completely in water. Just soak it through and through and then iron it hard to take all of the wrinkles and the distortion out. I did that before I took this photograph so that it would be very representative of the actual image. Look at that stitch out. This thing couldn't have been more perfect. I really have a hard time finding anything that in reality I can quibble about. How did we get to this point? Were we lucky? Was I lucky or was I good? I'm going to answer yes to that. I employed everything that I've learned so far, barely scratching the surface as I have in the embroidery world. I've learned a lot of things, blood and guts and tears and frustration. I applied everything I've learned so far to this patch, and boy did it pay off with this one. What did we do to make this thing come out so good? The basic design lends itself to stitching success. I can't really quantify everything about it that makes it work so well, but I do know a few things. The stitch order, the gold in the background stitches first. The flare around the outside of the sun in the background is made of a digitized block so that the stitch angles are infinitely variable as it winds its way around. The little small pieces here stitched next, and you can clearly see the depth created by the fact that these were stitched before the outline around the bear stitched. Those things create that visual interest I keep talking about. The satin stitch border stitched last of the gold color, and it's fairly wide. Again, I'm a decimal geek. I'm not a metric person. I stitched this border at 0.12 of an inch, fairly wide, and 0.014 stitch spacing. Gives me a nice lofted, dense looking, solid, contiguous satin stitch. That width makes up for a lot of transgressions where things miss, push, pull. Before I actually stitched it out, I went back and I took some of the nodes that stood to fall out of range. The default stitch angle in MBX V5 is 15 degrees, which is running across the tangent this way. For whatever reason, it seems to affect the right side of stitch fields more than the left side. So I've learned that I need to pull my nodes out much closer to the edge of the border stitch than anywhere else. I did go back and do that. I don't think I was in any danger of missing the mark on any of those. What other things did I do? The sun, a bright orange, and believe me, even though this looks fairly bright, it pales in comparison to the actual fabric thread. It's very bright. This was created as a solid object, but I added stitch angles so that the stitching was going perpendicular. the entire way around. It was in a radial pattern. So my stitch angles were infinitely variable there as well. The next item, the purple blue, many of those pieces, as previously discussed, were made as digitized blocks so that the stitch angles were highly variable. The only pieces in here that were done as solid objects were the glasses and the nose. So there were lots of varying stitch angles that would hopefully negate themselves or cancel themselves out in terms of the push-pull. Nothing would miss by a mile in one small little area of the patch. These shadows, the lighter blue shadows, were stitched across the short distance of the fields. Look at the alignment on this. Everything just lines up almost perfectly. The colors are great. This is a slightly darker, almost like a Bimini Maui blue. It's very bright. Everything is just so crisp. You can see all of the things I fussed about. Going to the trouble of making the purple blue outline as a bunch of separate pieces so that it lent that visual interest I keep going on about. You can see the shadows created here under the upper lip. You can't quite see it so much under the nose. Look at the left ear over the top of the glasses and over the top of the head. These things actually show up much more clearly when you look at the physical patch. That kind of stuff, if you want to just bang out embroidery, you can do it all as single pieces. That's not a big deal. That's fine. It works. When you're 15, 20 feet away, who cares? Nobody sees it. When you get up closer to those things, to the people that really get into this sort of thing, that's what makes the difference. This visual interest in all of these things. This gold outline around the ear is on top of the flare from the sun. You can clearly see the shadow there around here. That's visual interest. That's what makes your work more compelling than just the average mundane thing you would see. So how good did this stitch out? Well, let's have a look. Let's look at the original drawing. Look at that. Look at that. That is an original drawing of this dude. And look at our stitch out. If you were a long distance away from this, you wouldn't even be able to see the difference. That's how close this thing turned out. It's really impressive how good this stitch out turned out. Now, you need to try and figure out why. Why did this work so well? What is it about the way this was laid out that made it so bloody successful? I am still working on that. I am trying to dissect why this worked so well, because I want everything I do to turn out like this. This is what I aspire to. Virtual embroidery perfection, from drawing to fabric. This is what I aspire to. I hope that some of this blood and sweat and tears and frustration and thought informs your own process and your own search for embroidery perfection.